All right. Now I have the pleasure of introducing you to our speaker, Monique Daigneault. And Monique is a great speaker from what I hear, and she has a very interesting background. So she used to be a competitive bodybuilder, and and she lives in Arizona, and so there's not the 3 hour time difference that we normally have with our speakers. But she's also the host of a radio show called on Voice of America Business called Leading with Intention. So she's been a coach for about a decade now, and you know, quite active. But I can't wait to listen to her show. I think that'll be fun. And she's been a contributor in 2 publications, a survival guide for corporate executives. So I think that this will be great information for us all. And Monique, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that introduction. And it's great to see everybody here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and keep my fingers crossed that there aren't any technical issues. Can everyone see that? See the PowerPoint? Okay, great, great. Well, the reason I picked this topic for today, I actually let my coaching clients choose content based on what they bring to my sessions. And the thing that's coming up quite a bit for them right now is psychological safety. So when something comes up a lot in coaching, I know that it's a burning issue. It's a hot topic. And so I talk about it on my radio show, I speak about it, and try to get more information out. So that's the reason I chose this topic for today. And as I'm talking to you about this, what I would like you to do in the chat, if you're willing to participate, is type in what you know about psychological safety, what you think it is, what you've experienced, and if you've experienced it because you work with leaders, or maybe you are a leader. So feel free to type in some information just to let us know what you know about psychological safety. And as you're doing that, I will give a broad definition of it before we really dive into the objectives for today. So what I'm finding is that leaders come to my sessions and they say, I want to create more psychological safety on my team. And the first thing I say to them is, well, what does that mean to you? What is psychological safety? And they say, well, I don't know, but I hear it all the time. And I feel like it's a good thing to have on my team. So really the broad definition of that, and thank you for those of you who are typing in, great, great comments. The broad definition is, as you're seeing in the chat, a shared belief within a team that they will not be punished or ridiculed or rejected if they speak up. They are able to openly address their fears, their questions, beliefs, and opinions, and it's a safe environment for them. Now, leaders really need to create this environment. And until leaders understand psychological safety, they can't create it. So today we're going to talk about some components of psychological safety, and then ways to implement those components, and then how to measure psychological safety, because it's not like we're building widgets when we're trying to create this kind of culture. So it's always good to figure out how to measure it. And we'll talk about that a little bit today. And these concepts are the same concepts that I use with my own clients in coaching sessions to help them understand and develop a culture of psychological safety. And it's also important to realize that psychological safety can be created on individual teams, but it can also be created throughout the organization on a broader level, which is actually the ideal culture. You want it to be a culture throughout the entire company. So we're going to talk about the components first. And this concept came from a book by Dr. Timothy Clark called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. Now, anyone on a team could be at a different level here. It's very different for each individual, and I'll talk in a few minutes about how that works. But the first stage of psychological safety is inclusion. And this is really the basic need of feeling like a person belongs on a team, like they are safe to be themselves and they're accepted for who they are. So that would include their unique attributes, their characteristics, the diversity that they bring to a team. So that's inclusion safety. And then learner safety is the next stage. So this is growing and learning. And for any of you who have worked with leaders or worked with teams, you might see that teams get stagnant and that people aren't growing or they're not learning. This satisfies their need to feel safe to exchange information, to exchange knowledge, to ask questions, giving and receiving feedback. And that could be a whole different topic in and of itself, giving feedback, because there's definitely an appropriate way to do that that helps people feel safe on a team. But really, in the learner safety component, they are able to experiment and they're able to make mistakes. So on many teams, what I'm seeing is that that's not there. People are feeling like they're unable to grow, and it really impacts the retention in a company, because a lot of people leave because they don't feel that they're growing, and they're constantly looking for some other type of environment where they can grow. Now, contributor safety, this is another level that satisfies people feeling like they're making a difference. And when I say that, I don't just mean that they're making a difference on their team. They want to feel like they're making a difference on a broader level throughout the organization. And again, this is the leader's responsibility to make sure this is happening. So if people don't feel like they are contributing or like they're making a difference, again, they're going to leave or their motivation is going to suffer. So it's really important that that level of safety be included if a leader is trying to instill a culture of psychological safety. Finally, the fourth stage is challenger safety. So this is challenging the status quo, speaking up if someone feels like there's a process that needs to change, or if things aren't going well, or if things need to be improved. And this is the toughest level of psychological safety to get a team at or company-wide, because many times people are afraid to have a voice. And it's really important that they do have a voice, but we'll talk in a moment about how that's done, because if it's not done right, it's really not going to do any good. So I'm going to pause there just for a moment, and I will be taking questions at the end of this. But before I delve into the other slides, I want to know if anyone has any burning questions that can't wait till the end. You're free just to come off mute if you want to and ask any question about these four components so far. So I'll pause there for a minute in case anyone, or you can type it into the chat. That's fine too.
I'll just call out a question. Did you say that this happens in levels, like inclusion has to be first and met, then learner, then contributor, then challenger? Is that how this works, or it's all together?
Typically, it happens in stages.
Thank you.
Yep. And I'll talk in a little bit about how individuals could be at different stages. So a leader might have people on a team that are at all different stages, but ideally the leader wants to get everyone to that fourth level. So that was a great question. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Sure. That's
Yes,
okay.
something just before that. Now it's slipping my mind. I said, what did you mean by this? And then it was just before I think it might have been within the challenger safety. You said something that I said, what is that? I'm thinking to myself, what does that mean? And I'm sorry, I was stumped.
No, that's
Uh,
okay. And in challenger safety, I'll just repeat it a little bit. Maybe it'll
Yeah.
jog your memory. So this is where people feel safe to talk about things that are going wrong that need to be fixed. Processes, situations, problems. They feel safe enough to challenge the status quo and make suggestions about changes that they think should be implemented. Did that help?
Yes, actually, that did key something to, if it's not done right, it can harm, like, what does that mean, not done right, I guess?
Yes, that is perfect.
Thank
It's a
you.
perfect segue into the next slide where we're talking about how to do this. Because it's one thing to know the 4 levels, and I promise I'll answer your question. It's one thing to know the 4 levels, but then leaders say to me, okay, how do I actually implement these? So in inclusion safety, and I'll take these one at a time again, this is where you want to encourage just a diversity of opinions. This is that first level where you're trying to get people to feel like they belong. So you want to encourage their opinions, no matter what kind of opinion it is. You want to encourage ideas, solutions, sharing. And another way to create inclusion safety is with assessments. As a coach, I'm a big believer in assessments, strengths assessments, personality assessments. But I'm a believer in sharing the information amongst the team if they agree to do that. Because the point of this in inclusion safety is to get people to know each other and to understand each other and to understand the diversity of the team. So the assessments are important, and that can be done in team building events. It can be done in weekly or monthly team meetings. So the leader really has to block out time for this. But it's a very good way to break down some of the individual silos and getting people to understand the diversity of the skills on the team. Now, learner safety is where the individuals want to be growing and learning. So this is where the leader needs to encourage questions, experimenting. They need to allow people to make mistakes. And this is a big issue that I'm seeing when people come to coaching. They are afraid and they don't want to make a mistake. So there's this culture of perfection that's created from the leader down. And it's really detrimental to the team. So in the learner safety component, we want to encourage collaboration, questions, solutioning, and giving and receiving feedback. And there's important steps to take in giving and receiving feedback, because if that's not done correctly, there will not be safety on the team. And I find many leaders don't really understand how to give feedback in a way that can be used as a growth tool. So that's very important also. Now, contributor safety, this is where they are wanting to know that they're making a difference. So here the leader has to tie the daily tasks of the individuals on the team into the greater vision of the company. And many leaders don't really know how to do that, but it happens through communication. And some leaders even do like a vision map where they're showing the vision and the goals of the company, and they're mapping it. They're literally mapping it to the daily tasks of the team, because the team needs to understand that what they're doing is actually contributing to the bigger picture of the company. And another way to do this is through stretch projects, letting the team members take on additional projects on other teams or shadowing other people on other teams so that they get out of the silo of their own team and they understand how the work that their team is doing impacts other people, other teams. So that's contributor safety and some ways to implement that. Now, challenger safety, and here's where I'll answer your question. This is, like I said, the toughest level of safety. And leaders can create this culture by allowing their people to just get together and talk about things that need to be fixed. And that could be called a think tank. Some companies have labs where they just set aside a certain amount of time each month for groups of people to just go and collaborate and talk about what problems they see and ways that those problems can be fixed. And the way to present those is through business cases, listening. Leaders have to listen with an open mind when people come to them with things that need to be fixed, and proactively promoting this. And the way I'll answer the question that was asked earlier, it's got to be done very carefully. And I'll answer the question by giving you an example of a story just a few weeks ago with a client of mine. So her company was going to make, her manager was going to implement a huge change across 3 teams. And she came to coaching visibly upset. Her voice was shaking. She was very upset. And she said, I don't agree with this. And I'm going to talk to my boss about it. And here's what I want to say. I've made some notes for myself. And she shared her screen, and she had 3 pages of ranting and raving and giving her opinion. And at the end of the 3 pages, she was going to threaten to quit if they didn't shift their decision. So what I said to her after coaching her a little bit, I coached her on the fact that if she went into her boss's meeting with that, she would probably come out without a job, because that's not the way to challenge the status quo. And I worked with her. You'll see the second bullet under challenger safety, business case creation. So anytime someone disagrees, instead of going in with all this emotional stuff that she had in her 3 pages, I could encourage her to collect data about why the change wouldn't make sense, the pros and cons of it, the pros and cons of leaving things the way they are, some other suggested options, and use data instead of emotion, because her 3 pages was filled with emotion, and that's not going to get anyone anywhere. So for challenger safety, the reason it's got to be done a certain way is because if you go in with just, I call it word vomiting, you just vomit your emotions all over leadership, you're not going to get through to them. They won't listen. It'll have the opposite effect. So what she did, we worked in coaching to help her create a business case of why things shouldn't be changed. And it took her some time. She had to collect some data. And by the time she had everything created, we pared down her 3 pages because she did need notes for herself to go into this meeting with. She ended up with just half a page of notes, and it was all data. So the beauty of this story is that once she went in with that, and I also coached her around controlling her emotions while she was in the meeting, because I didn't want her, she was on the verge of crying, and I wanted her to go in strong, have a good voice, and be able to state her case. So we role played and practiced. But she went in, the meeting went so well that her boss wanted her to have the same meeting with his boss, with her skip level. And she met with that person too. So because of that, what her skip level decided to do was to seek feedback from everyone else who was involved, because initially it was just her boss making this decision, and the skip level kind of just went along with it and agreed. So after she presented her case to both of these people, the skip level decided to collect feedback from everyone and found that most people agreed with her, And so now they are rethinking the whole thing. And they're, going to put some other changes in place that are more acceptable. And I asked her not to go in saying she was going to quit, because that's taken as more of a threat. So what I coached her on was to wait and see what happened with this business case. And then if she didn't like what she saw, she would have a decision to make, but she could keep that to herself. She could stay, she could quit, whatever she needed to do. So let me pause there first of all and see, make sure I answered the question that came up. Did that help?
Yeah, it did a lot, and thank you. And as I'm hearing this, I'm thinking about in a lot of cases where we've well, really, I'm thinking back to my university days when I was like, we were actually like promoted to flutter emotions, which is totally just I realized even then it was really kind of counter.
Right. Right. I mean, senior leaders, they need data. It's always going to be about the bottom line and how is this going to affect the company? How is this going to affect revenue? So they don't do well with a lot of emotion. I mean, there's a place for emotion, but not something like this. So for challenger safety, that's why it's the fourth stage, because people need to work up to that. They need to feel safe enough in inclusion, and then learner safety, contributor safety, and all through those other levels. If it's done right, they should be learning what this woman learned that I worked with. They should be learning how to do this appropriately. They should be learning how to approach senior leaders in a professional way. And by the time they get to the fourth level, they should feel safe enough to do this, and they should know how to do it in an appropriate way. I do see a hand. Cheryl?
Yes, and this may not be the right place to do or to ask this question. So if it needs to be tabled, that's great. But I've been oftentimes in a situation where I've been brought in as a contractor to address certain things. And one thing, I'm in HR. So one of the things that I was asked to address was the whole leave policy, and one person was doing all the work, I guess, if you will, in work that should have been done by managers. So HR was following up with employees and all this stuff that creates a lot of issues. Anyhow, when I talked to my boss about it, one thing he said, he goes, "Well, you're the only driver on the team." And I'm like, well, that's a really lonely place to be. And then secondly, he asked me to do this, but then allowed two other staff members to literally take apart everything I was doing without even telling me this was happening. And I guess, how do you handle the situation when you're asked to do something, but then you're being undermined? And clearly it was not the right role, but I tried really, really hard to fit into the role for months, and then, was asked to leave the organization. It's like, I did. Oh, and then by the way, then the boss took everything that I said and submitted that to senior management. But how do you, when you're asked to make the change and you're getting undermined, and the boss is telling you, yes, do it, but on the other hand is saying, yeah, you're different, and isn't supporting you? I mean, do you just get smart and say, gotta go, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, it is a really
can you?
personal decision to make, because ideally, I mean, you have to do what you're told to do, but technically that would have all been flushed out in advance, and you would have had support. It doesn't sound like an environment where there was a lot of psychological safety, because there is no undermining when there's psychological safety. There's as you can see, there's collaboration, there's experimenting, there's making mistakes, and there's giving and receiving feedback, which is an important part of it. So I think, it's a personal decision. You have to do what you can to feel like you are doing what you're asked to do. But if it gets to the point where it's totally against your value system and you're just fighting this uphill battle, then sometimes, unfortunately, you have to make the decision to leave. And that's what a lot of people, I think, struggle with when there's a lack of psychological safety. It undermines everything that should be happening on a team. It undermines productivity, motivation. About 30% of people leave companies because they aren't motivated. They don't feel safe. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but it was a good example that you gave. And under challenger safety, the other, the final bullet there is proactively promoting productive debate. So here's where it can get into conflict, because there's a difference between unhealthy conflict and healthy conflict. So some guidelines have to be set on teams, I think, before there can be productive debate. And these are things that are worked through all 4 levels, but some things to think about to help your team get to that 4th level are things like, how will the team communicate their concerns about a process that isn't working? So like this example I gave of my client, she just dumped her emotions out and she wanted to go communicate it that way. So there should be some loose guidelines as to how people should communicate their opinions or their feelings. How can those reservations be shared with people in a respectful way? She wasn't going to do it respectfully. So that's got to be looked at also. And then what are the norms for managing conflicting perspectives? So if you're on a team and you have one opinion about a change that needs to be made, and someone else has a different opinion, and yet someone else has a third opinion, how do you manage that? And there's no right or wrong way. It's what you all come up with, maybe in that learner safety phase of the collaboration. It's got to involve communication and really talking through things and collaborating and coming up with something that works for the team. Now I see a hand, Russ. Did you have a question?
I have more of a statement that I'm dealing with in an organization, which everyone's going to say, "Oh, Toastmasters, it's such a nice organization like that." Well, yes. So they're particularly and on specifically speaking to our area, where I feel there's a sense of, listen, I mean, actually I've had this happen where I share what's going on with the person involved, and they get angry and shut down, and then we'll keep a big distance forever. So is that a psychologically safe? How psychologically safe of a place is that?
Well, it could also be passive aggressive behavior on that other person's part too. It's
exactly.
Yeah, you can't control the other person's response. For that, I would say there's some really high level communication techniques. I don't know if anyone here has heard of NVC, or nonviolent communication. That is a really good technique for communicating, especially when people have that passive aggressive behavior or they tend to shut down. There are some ways to try to work with people like that, or work within situations like that. It's still no guarantee, because you can't control another person's behavior. But to me, that doesn't sound like the environment is not psychologically safe. It sounds more like the personal communication behavior of that other person. Does that make sense?
Yes, I mean, a couple emails from me have been a little strong, I could certainly say the least. And that has been in response to feeling that sort of that bullying versus victim dynamic. Is what I'm getting. And this came. We had a contest last night, and I was second place of 2. And everybody said, "Oh, great speaker! It could have been crap, and it would have gotten 2. Maybe I could have even said at the last minute, I refuse to speak, and maybe it would have still gotten the second place." What does that mean? It doesn't have a lot of meaning. And this has been going on many times for years, and I'm ready to move on from it because I know that I need other venues where to really grow.
Right.
And a lot of struggle, but on all levels of there and Toastmasters and other organizations are struggling in one degree.
Okay.
Of,
So it sounds
virtual,
like,
in person. Yeah, there's
yeah.
that. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're at that point where you might have to make that personal decision of
Yes.
moving on. And I think that over time, you know, if you've tried, if you still can't get what you need out of the group, it's time to make that decision. Thanks, everyone. Great questions and
You're
great
welcome.
comments.
Thank you.
So the final piece of this is, all right, you know what psychological safety is, you know the 4 components, some suggestions on how to implement them. But I'm a big believer as a coach that we have to measure progress somehow. And psychological safety, like I said, is not tangible. So how do you measure it? There's a couple really easy ways. And what I'm finding in a lot of my coaching sessions is that leaders come to the sessions and they're trying to read the minds of their people. And they're saying things like, well, I think I could do this, or I think they might like this, or I think they're catching on. I think there's psychological safety. They might feel safe. But you don't know unless you ask. You cannot, and everyone is different. There might be 10 people on a team, 3 feel very safe, and they might be at levels 3 and 4. But 2 may not feel like they're at any level, or maybe they're at level 1. So you have to have the conversation. You have to have the communication in the team. And this can be done in team meetings. It can be done in one-to-ones, which I think all leaders should be having. That's kind of like, I'll try not to get off on a tangent on that, but I have some leaders that say, well, yeah, I have a monthly team meeting and that's all that's needed. I don't agree. I think there should be one-to-ones, because you need to get down to the nitty-gritty with each individual to really figure out what they are missing on the team. What do they need more of? Which level are they at? So now that you know the 4 levels, you can have one-to-ones with people and you can try to ask the right questions to gauge where they think they are at with psychological safety. So it can be informal. In team meetings, I have had leaders say, well, I try to bring it up in team meetings and no one says anything. So that's an indication that there's not enough psychological safety. Because if there is, people will be speaking up. They will be giving their opinion. So you have to start the conversation somewhere by asking. And then the leader can observe. Now, a lot of this is hard if everybody's remote, but it can still be done. You can gauge your team's motivation, the camaraderie. The metrics will show you a lot. Productivity, retention, all of that should be measured. So you've got a way to see that. Now, the main reason people come to me for the psychological safety topic is because their employee engagement surveys went out and came back, and those scores were really low. So they come to me with their survey results and they say, you know, this goes out once a year and each year it's been getting lower and lower and I need to do something about it. So that's when we dissect those surveys, because usually the surveys have multiple questions under certain categories of like trust, collaboration, things like that. So we dissect those questions and we dissect the scoring on those questions. And then we create action plans around how to lift that safety factor up. So the employee engagement surveys are a good way to measure, but they usually go out once a year in most companies. So you've got a year to increase the score, but it helps to know where you're at along the way. So there's a psychological safety survey, and that is a resource that you'll receive whenever the resources go out after today. You'll receive that. It's not perfect. You can play around with it. You may even think of additional questions to put on it. But what you'll get today has about 7 questions on it, I think, 7 to 10 questions. And you rate, the person that takes the survey rates each question on a scale of, I think, 1 to 7. And that can go out at any point during the year before you do the employee engagement survey again. And you could send it out quarterly. And it doesn't go, it goes to each individual person, because remember I said each individual is different as far as what they feel they're safe at or safe with. So you want to give it to them individually. They don't even have to put their name on it. If you're worried about that, or if they are worried about it, they can just fill it out and turn it all back in somehow, and it can be, the results can be compiled. So that is another good way to gauge the level of safety through the year. And that is in addition to all these other things. It's not like you pick just one of these things and that's your method. All of these things should be implemented. You should constantly be asking in the meetings, in one-to-ones, observing, checking the metrics, because it all adds up. So the surveys are great ways to measure. Now I see a question. Is it Udo? Do you have a question?
Yeah, yes, it is. I noticed in the measures that you described here, it was in small groups, either one-on-ones, team meetings, people you know and see. If you're in the office, that almost never happens anymore. But my question really pertains to this, and with some background. My last employer was a Fortune 50 company. And what they attempted to do was to get the pulse of the entire international organization through at least a once a quarter survey. And it got to the point as a business practice where every department was measured. Are you up to snuff on the required score? And it was openly communicated in the organization which departments were with it, which departments weren't. My question to you basically is, if you were trying to establish a valid, this is a pejorative phrase, but I mean it sincerely, a valid measure for a large organization, how would you go about it?
Well, I love the fact that the company you're talking about did that. I think that's amazing, because usually what I hear in coaching is that there is really no culture organizationally for psychological safety, and the leader himself is trying to do it just within the team. And I think it's great if a company can create something like that where it's measured across the organization, and then there's a way to, drill it down into individual teams. I love that. The resources you'll get today are for teams, and I get the question often, well, what if there is no larger organizational culture of psychological safety, and it's just that leader trying to at least instill it in their team? So that's what these resources are for. But it's, it all goes back up to senior leadership. So if one leader is trying to get their team to have this level of psychological safety, I would hope that that leader is meeting with peers, and that the other peers can also be doing it. And there should be communication all the way up the chain. Otherwise, you're kind of fighting a losing battle. But what you've just said, it's been the other way around. It's starting at the top and filtering down, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, I think the concern though is, and the group I was in is just like a fraction of an enormous organizations of tens of thousands of employees and all that. So I don't have a good sense of the whole company, but to make an analogy, my boss would talk about work, and his common statement was, it's Monday every day at work. In other words, it was not a happy place. And to use his phrase, no one felt they could speak openly. So even though there was data that the company was improving, and the sunshine's coming up over the hill and there's a gorgeous sunset, there was a feeling, at least in the division I was in, that we're not dealing with reality. If that makes sense. That's why on a large scale, that effort like that, I just wonder, well, how do you know that what you're hearing is real?
Well, the data shows, so whatever the data shows, I mean, you've got to look at data, and it sounds like, so the larger organization you're saying was not doing well, but smaller parts of that, the
Well,
data
I mean,
was,
you know, the organization self-reported over time, everything was getting better.
oh, okay.
You know, it wasn't that the organization was reporting things were getting worse. There was a big pressure to make your numbers come up. You know, you can measure production, you can measure quality, and there's
Yeah.
a somewhat objective way to measure that, right?
Right,
But this to me is really hard to measure, because unless you know the answers come from the heart, you know, it's like the old engineers paradigm of garbage in, garbage out, right?
so are you saying you don't think the responses were accurate?
I can't speak for the whole company because it's so big.
Mhm.
I can only speak for the division that I was in. And I know there was a lot of, you know, wink, wink, we got to get our numbers up. You know, um, I could say more, but
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. I don't know if you've observed that kind of scenario with other large companies before. I think smaller companies, smaller teams are definitely easier to manage. I mean, I once worked for a company which made the business decision, we will no longer create a manufacturing plant more than 500 people because it's impossible
Mm,
to manage effectively. It's too
yeah,
freaking big.
yeah.
So I'll be quiet.
No, that's okay.
Take your
I'm
comments.
I'm sensing there was pressure to manipulate the answers too high, and there was pressure to make it look better than it really is. Although again, that's just what I'm
Yeah,
getting
it would,
at.
because otherwise the
Yeah.
periscope goes on you, right?
Right, right. And the periscope should go on people because the numbers should go up if they're low. So, you know, I suppose that data could be altered. And I don't know if there's really any control over that at the lower levels of management. So I don't know that I can speak to what the solution would be to that.
Well, I don't think that data was altered. It's not like election results that were purposely changed. It was like the information you get from your boss is to say, well, he or she is getting heat, you know, because we got to bring our numbers up. And these are the kind of answers that the organization is looking for. Well, if you're leading, you can talk about certainly a company wants to accomplish A, Y, Z and say that in perfect honesty, right? You can talk about, I want psychological safety, but you have to walk the talk, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Ruel, looks like you have a question?
Yeah, no, it's similar lines of what I think Udo was saying. Just in my experience, we implemented pulse surveys and surveys such as these, and in our management meetings, it'd be easy to be with our HR business partner, and then we'd start to segment out the data. And just the point that I would just share is this can go both ways, right? Like this type of data can kind of get weaponized, if you will.
Right,
And I think to what I think Udo said is just you got to walk the talk,
right,
that if we're truly going to implement these types of measures, we should objectively listen
yeah,
and take action where it is. And then other things, people are just ranting, right? And you just kind
right,
of
right,
let it go. Otherwise, this thing becomes just like a scorecard that people are just trying to make the numbers go up, or people don't start sharing, and then it's not really a good measure.
right.
But I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to measure. I've seen it work where you kind of keep it simple and people
Mhm.
can feel the pulse of the organization, and it feels true, and we're not digging too deep, and we're keeping it open. But it's a bit of an art from my experience. So that's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it certainly is. And I think if each leader starts out by being just responsible for their own team and implement this on their own team, and then hopefully peers are doing the same thing. I mean, you've got to start small, especially if it is a huge company. So be responsible for your team and try some of the techniques, observe, listen, ask, and see if you're noticing a difference. I think there's one other hand up. I just can't see the name. I'm sorry. It was after Ruel.
Yeah, that's Mudit. Yeah, hello everyone. Great discussion. So I have a just quick comment and a question as well. So in past, like I led larger team about 70 or 75 people, and and then I also launched one time survey as well, like just simple 4 or 5 questions, like what is the one thing, let's say you want to start doing, what is the one thing you want to stop doing, and such things like that.
Yeah.
Pretty good response from everyone. But the what I want to ask over here is like considering larger team and post-COVID, people are distributed, global teams, and how what is the better way? Like a survey is one time you could do, then engage with people who are not like feeling at that level or need some help. But what is the continuous basis? You don't want to launch survey as well too often as well. But if it's a team of 70 people or so, what is the effective way of managing? Obviously you can ask the same thing to your next level leadership as well, but anything which you can highlight for leading larger team, how effectively should lead, or how to make sure of that, like everybody is energized and able to contribute at the level best.
Well, I think it should be a discussion with the team as far as how they want to proceed. So I'm a big believer in educating the team about this topic, like I just did today, because many of your team members might not even know what psychological safety is. They might know they don't feel it, but they might not know how to describe it. So I'm a big believer in conducting education, and it's back in that second level learner safety, where they're getting educated and getting skills, building their skill set. So they can be educated about this. And then as a team, it can be decided, how do we want to move forward? Do we want metrics? How often do we want to deploy a survey? And I think the team collaboratively can come up with it. And you can even lead them to the other level of contributor safety. You can use this topic of psychological safety and say, this is our broad goal. We want everyone at level 4. Let's collaborate. Let's break out into think tanks and learning labs, and let's figure out how to do this. So it's not the leader that's taking on all the responsibility. It's everybody, because I think it's, it comes down to where it's everybody's responsibility to make sure that they're feeling safe. Does that help at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
No, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just had a knee-jerk thought thinking through all of this. To me, if you could take survey results, and if you look at other measures like is stock going up or is stock going down? Well, if stock was going up, stock price, that might be an indication people are happy and there's constructive world out there. If it's going down, it doesn't mean that you don't have the safety you're looking for. But it could be a clue that this is just one of several things that's not quite right.
Yeah, I think you have to, depending on the company, you have to look at all the data. It's a very good point. So in true coaching fashion, I have some next steps for you. I wouldn't be a good coach if I didn't leave you with some things to do. I would really, like I said, I'm big on education. So I would love for you to make sure that you download this slide deck, all the resources that I sent through. The survey is one of them. Another one you'll receive is just a checklist of behaviors that leaders can implement within themselves, because I really think leaders have to set the example here. They have to at least start the driving this, and then they can maybe filter it down to the team to collaborate. So there's a checklist of behaviors, a psychological survey. You'll get the recording to this. So feel free to pass that on. And then my contact information is all over everything. So feel free to touch base with me if you need anything. So I think we might have time for maybe one more question before I turn it back over. So does anyone have a final question or any comments? And thank you for comments in the chat the whole time. I really appreciate that. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. I hope this was informative for you. And now I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Monique. That was very informative. It's such a hot topic right now and such an important topic. So I'm really glad that you shared this with our community. We do have a couple minutes. If anyone else has any questions while we have Monique. If not, we will wish everybody a happy weekend and see you in 2 weeks.
How do we download the slide deck?
We will send out an email at the end of the day,
Okay.
recap, and Monique has provided the PowerPoint, some handouts, and then it will include the link to the video.
I enjoyed it.
you.
This was good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
everyone.
Thank you, Monique. Great presentation.
Well done.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
wonderful. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
really so important for this, very relevant.
Yeah,
Yes.
very important topic. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. We will have a good weekend, and we will all see you in 2 weeks.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good
Peace out.
one.
Peace out.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.